Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Rider Rumblings video podcast. I'm here with Murray McCormick, the Regina Leader Post's venerable football writer, and we're discussing one of the better CFL games we've seen in a long time, that being Friday's 31-24 victory, Rough Riders 31-24 victory over the BC Lions. Didn't look promising there for a while, but the Rough Riders ended up winning the game, improving their record to 5-2. They're in sole possession of second place in the CFL's West Division. That could have easily gone the other way in so many places. I think the Lions could probably say the same thing. What's your take on that game, Mur?
Well, I think we can both agree it was whoever had the ball last kind of won, eh? Even if you stretch it beyond the drive and you get that kickoff return, Lucky Whitehead fumbling that kickoff return. Like, you're the historian. Like, have the Riders ever scored that many points in 2 seconds, I guess?
Nobody has. It's a CFL record. I checked with Steve Daniel, the CFL's ace statistician, and that has never been done before. The closest one I remember was in 1981 when the Riders played host to Hamilton, and Dwight Edwards scored on a touchdown pass late in the game, and then they tried the onside kick, and Steve Dennis of the Rough Riders not only recovered the kick, but scored a touchdown on it. And those were 8 seconds apart. And that is what I believe to be the shortest gap between touchdowns in Rough Riders history. But given that the last touchdown was scored with no time on the clock and that Cody Fajardo's touchdown was scored with 2 seconds left, there was more. Had the clock kept running, had there not been no time on the clock when Damon Webb recovered the fumble and ran 44 yards for a touchdown, there would have been a greater gap than 2 seconds. But officially, it's a 2-second interval between the touchdowns, and I don't think that one is going to be ever going to be matched or even approached. 2 seconds. It would take a unique set of circumstances. Yeah. Well, I suppose it could happen in 1 second. I mean, if that scenario unfolds again, you could have a 1 second gap, but it's going to take some doing.
I got an email. I got an email from a reader.
I got some too. I got some from Brad Thompson that I want to read. So.
And I got an email from a reader wondering what the score was. He says, Murray, you got the score wrong in the paper. And I said, no, I didn't. And he says, yeah, you got, when the Riders won 25-24. I says, no, they returned the kickoff. I said, oh, I don't know why. He didn't watch the last part of the game, but he thought the game didn't even think about that last field, that touchdown return on the fumble return. So I was kind of weird. And I looked and I asked the league, why didn't the Riders kick the convert? Which is an interesting question. And they said they should have in the game, but I guess the Riders refused to, says the game's over, and then they just didn't bother. So it's kind of one of those things where interesting. Does it make a big? I'm going to ask Craig Dickenson about that, but it sounds like one of those things where they should have done it. Technically, they should have done it, but the teams were all running off the field, and
the game-winning points were not those of Cody Fajardo. That was the convert by Brett Lawther, who's recovered nicely from a bit of a slump that he was in. He started off 10 for 10 for the year, then went on a 4 for 9 skid. It has now hit 6 field goals in a row. So whatever glitch there was in the middle of those 3 surges has certainly seemed to have been addressed.
And converts aren't automatic anymore.
32 yards.
32 yards. That's far enough to make it challenging, and but close enough that they should be able to make it. So it kind of adds. I know there were probably a lot of people in Rider Nation that were holding their breath when Brett lined up to kick that convert, because we've seen guys miss it in the NFL more often than not, and it just happens. But good for Brett that he had the wherewithal to. It was funny, and I've read some people have brought up the comments about whether Cody had crossed the goal line, and we never did see a definitive angle from TV.
No, it never did. When he first surged behind Dan Clark there, I thought, I'm not sure. But I think the person who had the best view would have been the official, and he thought it was in, and there's really nothing replay-wise to overturn it. So,
and he was emphatic in he didn't even doubt it. He put his arms up right away, and he was the only one looking right down the line. So I was kind of surprised to see how many people brought up until we had a definitive line, which is interesting because the NFL has that angle. Looking right down the goal line because the cameras are in the those orange pylons. But it's just interesting the CFL didn't have that angle.
There was such a mass of bodies, though. I'm not sure what that could have been. You know what it was like? It was like Ron Lancaster's last touchdown in his last CFL game, and he scored on a 1-yard quarterback sneak. And there was a lot of talk at the time that was as amazing a game as that was for Ronnie against the Eskimos on October 29th, 1978, that he didn't get in. But there was just no way they could not give Ronnie a touchdown. And you remember Louis Passaglia's last game in 2000 when he came in and had the quarterback sneak. And again, that was there was just no countering the moment then. But interesting, though, there was a neat parallel between that and the West Final in 2019. The Riders got down to the 5-yard line. They were first and goal from the 5. Cody Fajardo was trapped in the backfield on first down, as he was against the Bombers. But the difference being the second down pass, instead of falling incomplete, took the Rough Riders down to the 1-yard line. Kyran Moore with a nice move to get down to the 1, and then the Rough Riders finished it off. And there was no hitting the upright this time.
No, it was pretty hard to do that.
Can you imagine? Imagine?
But hey, remember 09? Too many men on the field, and what happened the first game of 2010?
Yeah.
And there was too many men, but this time the Riders won. So I hate.
Did you know? And you know what? The too many men thing was actually happened for the first time in 1978 to the Rough Riders, notoriously. They were playing Montreal at Taylor Field. Don Sweet came in to kick what he hoped would be a go-ahead field goal. Riders were called for too many men. He got another chance at it and missed. And I think it was Brian O'Hara that ran the ball out of the end zone. And the Riders ended up marching down the field and ended up settling for a single. And so the three most notorious too many men's in Rider history are all against Montreal. Really, two in Regina and one in Calgary, and that one in Calgary certainly stands out. But they'd set that precedent back in 1978. I'm in 1978 mode today, Mur.
Oh, you are.
Yeah. Speaking of that, game's on YouTube, by the way. Look, if you go on YouTube and go Rough Riders Montreal 1978, it was a really good football game. The Riders were up quite substantially, and Jerry DiTilio came in and quarterbacked the Riders, or quarterbacked Montreal to a comeback. And Larry Smith, former CFL commissioner, was a really big player in that game. So it's a really cool video to watch if you're into nostalgia. So
are you?
As I see today.
Where's the dog? I don't see the dog yet today. Maybe.
Candy is.
Oh, okay, there we go. Candy is Dandy.
Adorable. Hi, Candy.
Yeah, she's looking.
The official dog of the Rider Rumblings video podcast.
She really is. I think she deserves that honor. So we had so many turning points in the last 3 minutes of that game on Friday night, just enough to fill a season. And a couple of mine were Dion Lacey and that big tackle on Michael Riley. Mm-hmm. Huge, or as someone used to say now, hugely huge. And then who would have believed that the BC punter would shank a punt? He's like the leading punter in the league, one of the best, and just off his foot. And all of a sudden, and plus, I've had friends of mine saying they were doing all they could to stay awake by then. Even though it was an exciting game, it's pretty late for some of our more established or senior readers or viewers, and they're doing everything they could to stay awake. And then that guy shanks the punt, and I never expected that.
The thing is, though, I mean, it's a 26-yard net, as it turned out, which isn't great, but it's not. A lot of the punts will be in the, let's say, the mid-30s net-wise. Yeah. So it's, even though it was a shank, they still got 26 yards out of it, as opposed to maybe the ceiling would be 40, 41. So it was basically the equivalent of another first down that the Rough Riders didn't have to get. I think the big one there was the missed field goal that would have put put BC up by 9. If they make that 43-yard field goal, it's a different story. Just like in the opener against BC, if the Lions could make field goals that didn't have an extreme degree of difficulty, perhaps the Rough Riders end up losing that game. But they were certainly fortunate that the Lions had some difficulties making makeable kicks in those two games. Otherwise, we might be talking about 3 and 4 instead of 5 and 2.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the Riders made the plays when they were there to be made. Some people have said that the Riders were lucky. I've heard that discussion. I think there was a really good discussion on the Green Zone on CJME, CKOM the other day about were the Rough Riders lucky or did they earn it? And I think Drew Remenda, Jamie and I talked about it at length. And you've still got to, the shank was lucky, but they've got to make the plays when they're there to be made. Otherwise, all the luck in the world doesn't count. And speaking of lucky, have you seen a player touch more extremes at a football game than Lucky Whitehead? He had 2 touchdowns, but he also had 2 fumbles that led to Rough Rider touchdowns. And on the opening play of the game, he dropped a pass.
Yeah.
So Was there, if you're doing a plus minus for that game, he might be -1.
Minus
The
one,
both
yeah.
both of his touchdowns are neutralized by touchdowns that the Rough Riders got as a result of his fumbles, and they dropped a pass on the opening series, and the Lions ended up punting. So for all that he accomplished that night, he ultimately benefited the Rough Riders more than he exploited them.
I read a story the next couple, I think yesterday, that he said he messed up. He stood up there, he was accountable, and I admire that when a guy does that. If you screw up, and you admit it, and you can move on. But he's a good player. He's so fast. That first touchdown was just, we talk about the Riders don't have any breakaway speed, and that's what you need. You need a guy like that, or like Brandon Banks when he was before this season. Anyway, just that speed will just turn you inside out and just create something out of almost nothing there.
Yeah.
So how do I kind of feel a little sorry for him, to see what happened. That it was a great play by DeMarcus Gates too to force that fumble on the kickoff. But by then everyone's celebrating and ready to go home. But it was kind of a tough night for Lucky Whitehead, and I'm sure he'll bounce back. But
it's interesting though, the Rough Riders have gotten away with not having any semblance of a deep passing attack. Aside from the occasional over-the-top play to Braden Lennius, there's been nothing. And Kyran Moore, especially in the absence of Shaq Evans, would seemingly be the Rough Riders' most dangerous receiver, but he's averaging well under 10 yards a catch. They very seldom go over the top to him. The one play that they had an opportunity to do that was against Winnipeg in the Labor Day Classic, and he was overthrown. But you look at Kyran Moore's speed and contrast that to the average per catch, and it's like a running back average per catch. They've gotten away. They've been not gotten away with it necessarily, but they've been able to win despite the fact that they don't have a deep passing attack. And in 2019, one of the strengths of this offense was the ability to go over the top. Now, notable by his absence is Shaq Evans. He may change things when he gets back, and he posted on Twitter yesterday that he's starting to run. Yep. So it'll be interesting to see how far off he is. Maybe I would think after the bye week there'd be a realistic conversation about him returning to the lineup.
That's what I would think too. I don't think they're going to bring him back anytime soon. They don't really have to. It's nice to have him for Calgary for this 3-game stretch against Calgary, but I don't think there's any huge rush other than they need his what he can contribute. But you'd rather make sure he was 100% healthy than bring him back at 80% healthy for a regular season game. Yeah, and I know so he's going to have an impact. But it was good to see that video of him. Someone's poking her head up. It just shows the guy off, and you see a dog's head in the corner of the screen.
Oh, is Candy made? Oh, there she is. Yeah, I see her.
It's making
We'll just focus on her, and I'll. There. Hi. That's our co-host.
Sorry for our viewers that I just chuckle at that one. It's just kind of like a cartoon where this head comes popping up.
She's so cute.
She is pretty cute. As I said, one day I'll get my cats to come in on this, and that'll be an interesting experience. They don't like people very much. What were we talking about? We were talking about something important.
What were we on about? Oh, Shaq Evans.
Shaq Evans coming back and anything. But what do you think about these 3 games against the Stamps? The Riders swept the Lions. They had to do that to put themselves in sole position. Now they got 2 or 3 on the road against the Stamps and 1 home game. How big is this 3-game set? Is this
the one thing they haven't done in the regular season under Craig Dickenson and Jeremy O'Day and Cody Fajardo with quarterback is beat the Calgary Stampeders. They were 0-2 against them in 2019. They lost handily at home. I think it was 35-10 or something like that in week 4 in 2019. Then they lost 30-28 at McMahon Stadium later that year. So they finished first in the West Division, but they didn't beat the team that would seem to be the one that you would have to get through, given that Winnipeg went and beat Calgary in the West semifinal that year. So that's still the one unchecked box with regard to Craig Dickinson and his coaching staff and his team in the regular season. They've got as I wrote about in my column, which appeared in the Tuesday's best-selling edition of the Leader Post, Craig Dickinson has the best record after 25 games of any head coach in Rider history, tied with Ken Miller at 18-7. And should the Rough Riders beat Calgary on Saturday, he will have the best record after 26 games because Ken Miller lost his 26th game as a Rider head coach. So a little bit of trivia there, but they've got to.
So just to take you back to that trivia, what makes the difference for Craig from all these other coaches that he gets to that? Do you think it's just having a franchise quarterback without doubt. I think that's the difference,
You know,
because that's
to a degree. I mean, Eagle Keys had Ron Lancaster when he took over as head coach in 1965. By 66, Ron Lancaster was the most outstanding player in the West Division. Don Matthews had Ken Austin and was barely a 500 coach here.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Ken Miller had nobody when he started out in 2008. They had Marcus Crandall, who they were hoping would be the guy. Then they went to Stephen Giles. Then they went to Darian Durant, and Darian turned out to be this amazing player. But Ken Miller came in 2008 without a proven quarterback.
So wait, Michael Bishop.
And Michael Bishop ended up, but Michael Bishop showed up during that season.
That's right.
But when they started the year, it was Crandall, Giles, Durant, and Michael Bishop showed up for the Labor Day Classic, and the Riders won 19-6 in his first game. But Don Matthews had Ken Austin. That didn't seem to move the needle a lot record-wise when he was here. But Craig Dickinson, when he took over, he had Zach Collaros, but there were so many questions swirling over Zach Collaros when the Rough Riders started the 2019 season. Not many questions about him now. I think that the big thing with Craig is just the buy-in from his players. And I think he's one of those coaches too, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts in some cases. If you look at the Rough Riders now, they're 5-2, but they're decimated. Well, decimated might be a extreme description, but they have been beset by injuries at various points, dating back to pre-training camp.
Yeah.
And their depth has been tested. That's a testament, I think, to Jeremy O'Day and Craig Dickinson. But Craig Dickinson has generally been able to get the most out of whatever roster he has at his disposal. And I think that's been he's a player's coach, and the players really like him. I think there's a tie there. There's a commonality there with Ken Miller, is that they would run through a brick wall for him. I'm not sure that there's still questions from time to time about game management, and timeouts late in the second half or second quarter tend to raise eyebrows at times. But by and large, Craig Dickinson has been a tremendous head coach of this football team, and the numbers do not lie. And Jeremy O'Day too, the 18-7 record as a GM. That's the best record of any GM in Rider history at this juncture, just ahead of Eric Tillman. Cody Fajardo has made 23 starts as a Riders starting quarterback. His record over that period, which would be 17-6, is the best record for any Rider quarterback ever over his first 23 starts. Darian Durant was second, 16-5, and I had this in my column. He's just ahead of Darian Durant. What number was that? Darian had, I think, 16 victories and a tie over his first 23 starts, and Cody Fajardo was 17-6. So you look at probably the three most prominent members of the Rough Riders, the three highest paid members of the Rough Riders football operations and roster: Jeremy O'Day, Craig Dickinson, Cody Fajardo, and they have set the pace to this point in their careers as record-wise, or at least in the case of Craig Dickinson being equal to the pace of Ken Miller. So that says something for this regime, especially when you consider that they didn't have a lot of options when Chris Jones left all of a sudden. Most other teams had their staffs hired. I think the Rough Riders would have considered I think Jeremy O'Day was going to be the GM whenever Chris Jones left. I'm not sure Craig Dickinson would have been the head coach had there been an opportunity to interview other candidates. They asked for permission to talk to Jamie Elizondo, were denied. They asked for permission to talk to Paul LaPolice, were denied. And Craig Dickinson turned out to be the best choice of all of them anyway.
Yeah, I think we kind of doubted him a little bit because we didn't get, basically not because we didn't think it, just he didn't have the qualifications. He's basically been a special teams guy, good one, and he hadn't had this opportunity to be a head coach. But he's sure proving us wrong week by week, and just his whole demeanor means. And even I would like to play for him, just to have him come up there and just chat and stuff. And we kind of miss that with the distance of Zoom calls. Even when he was a special teams coordinator, how many chats we'd have just standing on the sideline with him. And he just loves to talk to people and talk football, and not just football, but other things too.
Craig Dickinson's a football coach who isn't a football coach, and I mean that in the most complimentary fashion. He's not militaristic. He's not a raging paranoiac. He's not us versus them. He doesn't play any of those silly mind games that some coaches tend to play. He's human, and if he makes a mistake, I don't think we need to inform him of that because he'll own it. And that was another quality that I think Ken Miller had. If he made a coaching mistake, I think he'd mention it before anybody else would have a chance to. I remember one game, I think it was in 2009 or 2010, and Ken Miller made this boneheaded coaching decision. And I walked down the ramps in the press box at Taylor Field just thinking, okay, how am I going to word this column? I was just going to absolutely carve him for this decision. I mean, it was that column was a layup, right? Rip the coach, stupid decision. And I get down to the press conference, and I asked Ken Miller about that decision, and he said, "Yeah, Rob, I probably shouldn't have done that." And it took all the steam and venom out of my column because he's basically owning it, and that's what I think Craig Dickenson does really well. He owns any mistakes he makes, and I think he's also done a very good job of transferring ownership of the team to the players. It's not and the fellow coaches. He's said several times this year, when asked about roster moves, he defers to the offensive coaches, for example, when they, as far as the personnel, and the same would apply to the defensive coaches, and they call the games. Craig Dickinson's got special teams to concern himself with, but he lets Jason Shivers do his job, and he lets Jason Moss do his job, and he's also mentioned Travis Moore several times, and he's quick to give credit to his fellow coaches, and I think that really engenders a lot of respect and admiration too.
Anyway, I want to get back. Let's get back to the Stamps before we get to the end of this.
Oh yeah,
two games in Calgary, one game at home. They haven't beaten the Stamps. It's a different Stampeder team, though. I think we have to admit, Bo Levi hasn't looked this normal. Struggling.
Write him off at your own peril, though.
I know that, and he's going to be so pumped for this game.
I mean, he's playing Saskatchewan, and people are already. There's already the discussion: should he even play? Should they go? Should they go with Plan B? I would be really leery of having to face Bo Levi Mitchell in a situation where he's got his dander up, because that could be a very dangerous Bo Levi Mitchell. He's still Bo Levi Mitchell, people. He's barely into his 30s. This isn't a washed up player. He could be an elite player in this league for another 6, 7, or 8 years. I wouldn't, if I were a Rough Rider fan or coach or player, I wouldn't sit back and derive any reassurance or comfort from the fact that Bo Levi Mitchell hasn't looked like himself, because I would almost think the law of averages has got to apply here.
Exactly.
And he may go off for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns on Saturday if there's anything that's taken for granted here. Yeah, and the Riders don't need to be reminded of that. They know his history. They know his capabilities.
Yeah, and then I think Calgary is a better team than they play. Just Bo Levi struggled a little bit to start with basically a broken leg that kind of slowed him down a little bit. It'll be an interesting one. I think going to be a good crowd. I think it's going to be one of those crowds where it's all red and green, because it's a Saturday night in Calgary. You can drive there on Friday, shop Friday night, Saturday, game, drive home on Sunday, or they don't even have to get that, because how many Saskatchewan people still live in Calgary, made the move to Calgary, and still go there and support the team. And it's still one of the heaviest rider supports of all the stadiums I visit. There doesn't seem, even Edmonton doesn't seem to have those numbers of rider fans. So there are them, but not as many as Calgary, maybe for some reason, but we'll look into that. But I know this probably isn't as related as much to CFL, but you saw that record-setting field goal by Jason Tucker the other day.
66 yards, and my fantasy team still lost despite having Jason Tucker get 19 points. Nice job by the GM there.
Yeah, actually pretty chaotic end to two games there. The one where the guy misses a 68-yarder, and the Jacksonville, I think it was Jacksonville, returned it 109 yards.
Yeah.
For a touchdown. That's crazy. And then Tucker hits this one, hits the post, doink, and goes in. And you are like the man connected with field goals. I'll turn over the mic to you, but long field goals in the CFL, are there any comparable to that one?
Well, it's interesting. Taylor Field's been the common denominator. Dave Cutler set the record of 59 yards in 1970. That was equaled in 1981 by Paul Watson of the Rough Riders at Taylor Field. In 1987, on Labor Day weekend, Dave Ridgway set the record of 60 yards. And then that record was broken in 2001 against Edmonton by Paul McCallum, who hit 62-yarder, and that still stands as the record. I'm surprised it stood this long. When you look at some of the howling winds, not only in Saskatchewan, but in the prairies, you'd think maybe somebody's, well, Corey Chamberlain tried the 64-yarder with Ray Early in in 2015. So there's been shots at it, but I'm surprised that somebody hasn't hasn't exceeded the 62-yard kick in almost 20 years now. The interesting thing about that is on the play before the Paul McCallum field goal, Keith Smith, remember him? Throws a bomb down the left sideline for Dimitris Bendros on about the 5-yard line. Ball's right there. Drop the pass. So
leading to one of the most famous nicknames in Rider history.
Yeah, Ben Drops.
Yeah.
It was already well ingrained by then, but it's interesting how we contributed, or that play contributed to the 62-yard field goal. And I was actually in Denver in 1998 at my first trip to Mile High Stadium when Jason Elam kicked the 63-yarder on the last play of the first half to tie the record set in 1970 by Tom Dempsey of the New Orleans Saints. And that record was ultimately broken when Matt Prater hit a 64-yarder. And now there's the 66-yarder by Justin Tucker.
You ever walked on a field and looked to see how far 62-yard field goals are? Oh. I've done that, and I've walked on the field and like, somehow these kickers do that.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, the uprights look about this wide apart.
It looks like a tuning fork when you're.
And there's 12 guys coming out, 10 to 12 guys coming at you. There's the snap, there's the time, there's everything, and there's getting the power, there's keeping it down. And I just kept looking at it going, holy smokes, that's a long way to kick a field goal.
Even in at the 2007 Grey Cup, after rider practice, I walked onto the field and I stood on the very spot where Dave Ridgway kicked the 35-yard game-winning field goal in the 1989 Grey Cup. I just want to, and Dr. Bill Elliott, who was a rider team physician at the time, also one of the many physicians who helped keep me alive to this point, was out there on the field with me. And he took a picture of me standing on that very spot on the 35-yard line where Dave Ridgway kicked the field goal. And I remember looking at the uprights and thinking, that's 35 yards. And that doesn't look like a gimme from here.
No.
That still requires a lot of precision. And so add 25, 30 yards to that, and then add the other dynamics that come into play. But I remember looking at that thing. I wonder what, if you're Dave Ridgway and you're just looking at those uprights 35 yards away, that they seem to be a little compressed when there's a pressure kicker. If you're any kicker, well, Dave Ridgway always made the pressure kicks in his second go round with the Rough Riders, except for the slip in 1992 in Edmonton, and he had no chance on that one because the turf gave out from under him.
Well, you and I have been to NFL games, and it seems even magnified because the NFL field's so close. Like there's not all the big wide space. Like, so imagine, I'd like to see what a 68-yarder looks like on an NFL field with just people going crazy and whatnot. But
that's amazing. I just I remember when a 50-yard field goal by anybody was a big deal. When we had offensive linemen kicking field goals, or and now it's become, Brett Lother's got an 80% accuracy rate this year. In 2019 it was 78. Once upon a time, those would have led the league, if not been close to leading the league. But now, if you're below 80, you might not have a job. And Brett Lother's had to go on a bit of a roll to get himself back up to 80. He's now 20 for 25. 80 would have been the gold standard once upon a time. And I've always maintained it was Dave Ridgway who changed the entire nature of the kicking game in the Canadian Football League. When his second go round with the Rough Riders, he was just an average kicker, in the 60s, maybe low 70s in his first stint with the Rough Riders. And then he came back after the Montreal Alouettes fold, and the Riders claimed him in the dispersal draft. And suddenly he's well over 80, and everybody pretty much had to. I think that put pressure on every other team and every other kicker in the league to be as good as Dave Ridgway. And I think what we're seeing now, where even 80% is kind of, that's all right, is still a byproduct of what Dave Ridgway was able to do as far as setting the bar for kickers across the Canadian Football League. And even kickers who had been in the league, even kickers who had been contemporaries of Dave Ridgway, elevated their games because Dave put pressure on everybody. He was that good for that during that stretch that began in 1987.
But even immediately, look at Brett Lowther was 90% in 18. Like, that's crazy to think. Like, how many things do you hit 9 out of 10 on, Rob? How many things do you do that?
Yeah, Certainly not when I was in school.
No, it's certainly
But
not on the golf course or anything I do. I'm never that good at anything. I'm 50-50 is pretty good, but to see
yeah, and if you get 8 out of 10, if you get 8 out of 10 kicking a weird shaped object through a goalpost or between two uprights, 8 out of 10 isn't that good anymore. 7 out of 10 might cost you your job. There's so little margin. Look at Justin Tucker. He just doesn't miss.
Yeah, no.
Even with 66 yards out, he just doesn't miss. It's in the NFL, 50-yard field goals. I think 62 or 63 of them are 63% of those field goals are attempts beyond or 50 yards or beyond are made now in the NFL. That's stunning when you consider what the kicking used to be like. And they're drilling them through a distance too. A lot of those kicks would be good for 60, 70.
Well, the 68-yard attempt, it falls 1 yard short of the goalpost, and that guy returns it for a touchdown and just shows amazing speed. It was an amazing weekend to watch the NFL. I don't know, except for the Steelers, who we got some issues with, but that's a whole other world, I guess. Your Broncos are 3-0. You must be very happy.
Yeah, they've played to opponents who collectively are 0-9. We'll see how it goes against Baltimore next week. But it was a good weekend for the CFL too.
Yes, it was. Great Friday night football.
Both games on Friday were terrific, and that's what the CFL needs, because that product, by and large, this season has been awful, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. As we record this, the Red Blacks are poised to play the Edmonton Elks on Tuesday night, and I think that game's a good excuse to watch baseball. So the NFL has had so many good games, and granted there are more of them, so the duds can get overshadowed by a number of games that are good. Kansas City and San Diego. Los Angeles was a really good one as well, and there were several. But the duds can get kind of forgotten when you see the highlights of the 4 or 5 games that are good each week. Yeah. So the CFL, you've got 4 a week, and so it's magnified if they aren't very good, because there aren't as many of them. But the CFL is not what it once was, by and large, in terms of excitement, even with those games factored in. And we spoke earlier about the Rough Riders' inability to go deep. Once upon a time, the CFL was a huck and chuck league, and now you're seeing a lot of the teams, they have the same type of playbooks, just bubble screen, hitch screen, all these short little horizontal offenses, and there's not a real there's not a lot of aggression going downfield, and the nature of the game has changed, and it's been to the league's detriment. But you still get nights like Friday where you're reminded of how magical a Canadian football game can be, and that was another byproduct of not only did the Rough Riders win, but they won in a manner that was exciting, and on a Friday night when you're hoping for some excitement to begin your weekend.
Let's hope Saturday night brings the same things to them in Calgary. Let's hope that right to the bitter end, no deadline pressure.
Yeah. Always. We got some questions, so I'm going to before I forget, I would be remiss if I didn't. We ask for questions every week, and we finally got some, and this is from a nice person named Brad. He said, I have some topics that I'd love to hear you discuss on Rider Rumblings this week. One, and this kind of works into what we were just discussing. Why are we throwing so many screens and lateral passes into the flats? It seems as if Jason Moss is treating Cody Fajardo as a rookie and won't open up the playbook much. It was better in BC for downfield passes this week, but much of the league is playing pretty boring and safe offensive football. Totally agree. And I think that's the nature of defenses. And defenses don't give you much. A lot of the teams are playing zones, and you just have to take what's underneath. There's a lot of bend but don't break defenses. The Rough Riders played one barely a week ago in terms of Toronto with Rich Stubler, and that's all they're going to give you is the underneath stuff, and they're hoping that one play won't work and it will kill your drive. If you can move the ball, I'll cite as an example the Rough Riders' first possession on Friday against BC. They moved the ball quite well, but there wasn't one gain that hit double digits, and eventually one play doesn't work and they have to kick a field goal. So that's 9, 6, 5, 4, 9, 7. That's nice if you make every play work. But all you got to do is mess up one play and your possession is over. And that's the mentality of most of the defensive coordinators. And that ultimately leads to the decisions made by the offensive coaches. What are your thoughts on that, Mer?
You hit every point I was going to make, Rob. I think too. But the point is, if it's effective, is it bad? If it works, but you said that one play can make the big difference. Now you're looking at 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 9. That's Cody talks about. So if it works, move it down the field the way you can. Let's have some nice long drives. I don't mind a long drive, but
the
I think you have to.
explosiveness is gone.
The explosive, and I think
Especially
you
here.
have to. And what do they have? 4 of them. So Braden Lenius has 4 of the 30-plus yard passes. That's basically
all 4 of them.
all 4 of them, which is crazy to think.
The only other gain over 30 yards was a William Powell 33-yard run against Toronto.
But you think Kyran Moore, with his elusiveness, could even get further with the yards after the catch, and he's pretty good with the yards after the catch. So maybe that's what they have to concentrate on. Can they do that? Get yards after the catch? And
well, they've been trying it, but it very seldom does it get a lot. It got them 3 or 4 yards after the catch in the second last play from scrimmage of the game on Friday, and that was pretty crucial. He made the first guy miss and was able to get down to the 1 yard line. But they're not really looking to him over the top, and the opposing teams know that's the only guy they got to worry about is a deep target. Yeah. So that's
maybe Ricardo Lewis can be that guy. Maybe.
Yeah, and he did have the 24-yard touchdown, and we should talk about that.
That was a beautiful pass. That was just perfectly in line, just on a rope to him, and they did everything right. And TJ Lee is not he's one of the better
defensive back, and he beat him to the post. And we've talked a lot and written a lot about Ricardo Lewis and why is he in the lineup and why isn't Paul McRoberts playing. Sometimes I think we just got to acknowledge that maybe football coaches know what they're doing to an extent that we can't approach. I think it was fair to question why Ricardo Lewis was in the lineup when he had 4 catches over his first 3 starts, and Paul McRoberts had 4 catches in the second half of his first and heretofore only start. So it's fair to wonder why, but the patience that was exhibited by the Rough Riders coaching staff and Ricardo Lewis certainly paid off on Friday. Not only did he have that touchdown, but he had some key plays on that final drive that was ultimately punctuated by the Cody Fajardo touchdown.
I think he had a 10-yard pass and a 16-yard pass that were just key. Like, they're all key. So that was pretty good. What's the next question? This guy. Did you have another question?
Yes.
2 of them. 3 of them. We're getting
we have 3 questions actually from Brad Thompson. That game in BC, more of an observation. That game with BC was the best officiating of the season. Some may take issue with that pass interference call on Ed Gainey.
Ticky tack.
It was ticky tack. Maybe as I watched
his right arm.
For the most part, the officiating wasn't an issue.
Right.
And it's interesting though. Players make mistakes all the time. Coaches make mistakes all the time. Yet there seems to be a higher threshold or a higher expectation for officials who probably make fewer mistakes than players and coaches. If players didn't make mistakes, every game would be 0-0. So, every play there's a mistake. If there's a big gain, somebody on defense didn't do their job. If there's no gain, somebody on offense didn't do their job. So there's a mistake on every play, but those plays on which the officials are highlighted seem to be magnified. But yeah, I think that was a well officiated game. So, it's nice to hear.
And I like the way, and I mentioned it earlier, how emphatic the goal line judge was, whoever was on that line. Like, he didn't think twice about it. And some of them may go, like with the Gainey pass interference call, it took him a while for the guy to throw the flag out of his pocket. And that's what I had an issue with. If it was pass interference, it should have been more bang bang than the time that took for the official to throw the flag. But I still feel, and you watch more and but it looked like Gainey's right arm got across his body a little bit. I don't know if it was pass interference, but what the heck? Things happen in life and stuff. But anyway.
The third question from Brad Thompson. And again, more of an observation. What an incredible show the special teams has been putting on this year, especially kick coverage. Yeah, the kick coverage has been really good. Yep. The kick returns have been okay with Jamal Morrow. There's been a couple. It looks like he's been able to break them. Brett Lawther is back in form as a place kicker. John Ryan is doing John Ryan things as a punter. One of the issues I would point out is when they're returning kicks, there have been too many penalties. I think they need to reduce those. But as far as the kick coverage, Craig Dickenson is in charge of the special teams, and the kick coverage has been very sound, as have the special teams overall.
There's too many penalties on special teams anyway. It just seems to be, how many times you see, when is the special teams play over until the official picks up his flag? There seems to be a special teams penalty on almost every play. That was kind of the nice thing to see, that long return, both on the in the NFL. There was no penalties on that one, 109-yard return. So that's maybe sometimes the officials can keep their flags in their pockets a little longer, maybe. I don't know.
The players don't do, if the players don't commit a foul, then there's no reason to throw a flag.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we're pretty much done here, Mur, unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, I can't think of anything. I think Candy did a remarkable job. We'll give a little shout
Look
out
at
to
her now.
Oh yeah. Does she ever do anything besides sleep? It's kind of like
she's so cute. She sleeps about 23 hours a day, so I think she's a threat to my job because that's my kind of a slumber. Rob Van Winkle. I'm going to sign off with our little thing at the end.
I just want to say I'm on the road for my first flight since the pandemic starts to get to Calgary. So I'm kind of interested to see what flying is like in COVID. It'll be an experience, I think.
Well, good luck to the pilot. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to send us a question, as Brad Thompson so thoughtfully did this past week, you can email Rob, that's me, at rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show, as we've just demonstrated. You can follow me, Rob, Candy, who does not yet have a Twitter account, but soon will. I'm at Rob Vanstone, or you can follow Murray at Murray LP, MurrayLP. And that is all. We will do this again next Tuesday, following the first of 3 straight games between the Rough Riders and the Stampeders. Murr, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Rob. It was fun.
And thanks so much for your time. And we'll chat again next week. Take care and have a great day.